things go wrong and they get recognized in the wrong way. And I just want to say thank you to Chuck and all the people that run the media and the sound stuff, because when computers crash as services are getting started, it makes it incredibly hard on those guys. So can you help me say thank you for that? It's great when it all goes smooth and goes the way it's supposed to. When things crash, it's a disaster, right? But Chuck did a great job of getting us back on track there. Hey, we are in the almost last week, next to last week of the series that we've been in for a while that we are calling Game of Thrones. If you've been with us, you know that we've been reading through 1st and 2nd Samuel. We just read one chapter a day, and then we come in here and talk about something from those 7 chapters that we have read during the week. And so we are getting close to being at the end of that. And really the whole premise of this series is that all of us have a throne in our hearts and our lives, that as we allow certain things to sit on that throne, it dictates the way that we react to people, it dictates the way that we respond in different situations, dictates our attitudes. And so the big question for this series, and as we walk through the 2 books of Samuel, is how can we get to a point where God is sitting on the throne of our lives? How can we allow God to be in the driver's seat of the things that we are doing, so that we're not in this revolving game where one day it's love and then 5 minutes later it's, a frustration or anger, or one moment it's discipline, and 10 minutes later it's the latest passion that I have. How can we get out of this Game of Thrones? That's the question that we've been asking throughout this series. And today, as we get started, I want to ask you a question that for some of us, we have to think back a little further on this than others, but I think all of us will have some connection to this. Do you remember how it felt to be a kid at Christmas? Do you remember what it felt like when your parents came to you and said, you need to start making a list of things that we're going to send off, a list of things that you might want for Christmas? Wouldn't it be cool if somebody came to you today and said, hey, I want you to make a list of things. I know you're 57 years old, but if you would make a list of things that you want, I might be able to get some of these things for you. I, as a kid, knew that I wasn't going to get everything on my list, but it was exciting just thinking that some of these things, some of the things that I desire in life may actually show up in my house on Christmas morning if I just write them down on this list. That was always an incredibly exciting thing for me as a kid. And I remember when I was, 5, 6 years old, somewhere in there, we had those big Sears catalogs, that you would go through and you would find gifts in there. And I sat down with one of my friends, a friend named Travis, and we were looking at this together as we were creating our Christmas list. And I have no idea why this jumped out at us, but we both kind of decided together as we saw it in the catalog that we wanted gold chains for Christmas at like 6 years old. So I was hip before hip hop was hip. Before rappers were wearing the big chains, I was asking for gold chains. And obviously my parents knew that I wasn't that hip, so they didn't get that for me for Christmas, But it's cool to just have those times where you can look up at anything that you want. You can ask for it. You may get, you may not, but you can ask for it, right? The funny thing is that as we get older, things don't change a whole lot. It's not like our wants and our desires just go away, right? We still have things that we want and desire, and that's not a bad thing. God puts that within us so that we will want and desire Him, as well as wanting and desiring appropriate relationships around us. But our desires change. So when a girl is little, she may ask for a Barbie doll, and as she gets a little older, as she starts to mature, she may ask for things not like a Barbie doll, but things that make her feel beautiful. So jewelry or clothing or makeup or some of those kind of things, and it's not like the desires have gone away, they just shifted a little bit. When we're little boys, we ask for Superman things and superhero kinds of things, and then we start to get a little bit older, and then we start to ask for a super fast car or a super truck or something like that. It's not like we grow up a whole lot as boys to men, but the desires are still there. They just change a little bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having desires at all. The problem is when our wants end up determining our character, when our desires end up determining who we are, when they sit in the throne, when they sit on the driver's seat, that's when they become a problem. And actually the word changes a little bit for it in that case as well. Just like, we had wants when we were kids. When it gets to the point where it's directing our lives and it's shaping our character, when it's something that we desire so much that it changes who we are, that is when we say it becomes a lust rather than just a want, and it becomes a lust. And that's kind of a, this is an awkward thing to talk about in church. I'm not sure I want to talk about this word, lust, in church, but this is something that's so real to life. And not only do we lust after things, but we as adults tend to lust after people as well. And so this morning, for a few minutes, we're going to talk about that. Talk about what happens when we allow lust to sit in the driver's seat, when we allow lust to sit on the throne of our lives. Where does that take us? What does it end up doing? Because if we're honest, pretty much everything in society tells us this is just a normal part of life. Everybody deals with this, right? This, by the way, this isn't just a man issue. We tend to think of it as somewhat of a man issue, but this is a human being issue. I think you know that if you're being honest, right? But this is one of those things where everything around us points to the fact that this is normal, this is okay. In fact, lust is the way that we typically entertain ourselves. I don't know if you've ever paid attention to this, but the TV shows that we watch, they are built around this. The movies that we watch, they keep your attention through this. It's built into the books that we read. It's built into the magazines that we read. It's built into the internet and all other media that we have. Is this whole issue of lust. And so it's just kind of always there. And it's actually the way that we entertain ourselves, like I said. So you watch a sitcom, and half of the jokes in the sitcom are going to be about something related to lust. And we just laugh at it, And sometimes, it's funny, right? I mean, if we're honest, we just admit, sometimes it's funny. And then we watch a drama on TV, and it's not just about doctors in the emergency room taking care of somebody, but all of a sudden on the side, they've got this relationship that's going on. And the reason people come back, and the reason they're intrigued, and the reason they keep watching is not to find out whether or not the guy is going to live in the ER. It's to find out what's going on in this relationship, right? And so that's the way that we entertain ourselves. But the problem is when it comes into the real world, when it comes into our lives, it's not funny anymore. When we have a friend that gets addicted to stuff that they're looking at online, then it's not funny anymore. When we are in a situation where our spouse has an affair, I don't think we would call that entertaining, right? It's a huge thing that we just kind of dabble with, and it's right here in front of us, and everything in society says this is kind of normal, this is just the way that life is supposed to be. God created us with wants and desires, and this is just the way it's supposed to be. But when it comes into our worlds, everything changes, and we see it for what it really is. And so this morning, as we look at this idea of lust, I think we can just be honest and say that when lust starts to drive us, let's just take it out of the personal for a minute and put it in the social. When lust starts to drive us as a society, poverty increases, broken relationships increase, unwanted pregnancies increase, abortions increase, single-parent families increase, and that's not saying that's the cause of all of that stuff, but that's what causes it to rise in our society. Whenever lust is in the driver's seat, it ends up hurting every one of us. That's the point. And so the question is, how can we deal with this? If everything around us, if everything communicating to us, if the advertisements on the billboards and the stuff we're watching on TV is saying this is okay and it's okay to dabble around with this, how do we deal with this in a way that's healthy in real life? That's what we're going to look at as we look at a story in the book of 2 Samuel. So if you read the 7 chapters that we were reading this week, chapters, 12 through 18, something like that. If you read in those chapters, you probably know where we're going with this, because there is one story in here that it's just kind of like, oh, I really wish this wasn't even in the Bible, because this is kind of embarrassing. and this is not clean, and we don't like to talk about this stuff. And you probably know the story that we're going to look at. It's actually the story that is about a guy named Amnon. Amnon is King David's oldest son, and he has an issue, and you're going to see what that issue is in just a second. So 2 Samuel chapter 13 is where we're going to hang out this morning, and we will start in verse 1 and just kind of talk through it as we go. So 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 1, it says this: "In the course of time, Amnon, the son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David." If you paid attention to the names that were listed there, it can get kind of confusing, but you might see this and say, wait a minute, did that just say that he fell in love with his half-sister? And the answer is yes. It does say that, which, like I said, that all of a sudden makes things really awkward, right? We don't like this. In our culture, we don't, most cultures around the world, this is not something that we look at and say, oh, that's normal, no big deal, right? It's not that at all. It's kind of awkward, and we don't like to talk about it. But here's part of what's going on. All right, so there are two problems that Amnon is wrestling with here. First of all, there's the problem of his half-sister being a beautiful person. If you read the rest of the story of Absalom in 2 Samuel, it tells you that for whatever reason, the good-looking genes just pass through this part of the family, okay? So Absalom and his sister Tamar are both, they're kind of like supermodels. You look at them and you just think, wow, that's not a normal looking person. They're a really good looking person. And so Amnon is looking at his half-sister, and in some ways he's struggling with lust because he's saying, wow, she's a beautiful person, right? There's another aspect to this, though, where Amnon is the oldest son of David. Absalom is the third son. So Absalom, the beautiful one, the one that everybody would look at and think, wow, we want to follow him, he's third in line. We don't know what happens to the second son. We don't know if he died or what, but he's not mentioned anywhere really in Scripture. So Amnon is looking at this and thinking, I am the rightful heir to the throne. I'm the oldest son. If King David, my dad, passes away, I'm the one who's supposed to be the next king. And he's thinking, but everybody's looking at my beautiful siblings, my beautiful half-siblings, and they kind of are attracting people to them. How can I keep the throne in my power, in my possession, so that it doesn't go to my brother Absalom? And one way that he thinks he might be able to do that is if I can control the sister, then I control the throne. So there's a lust for power, and there's also a lust for beauty that's happening here, okay? And as we keep reading, you're going to see how that plays out. In verse 2, it says this: Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar. There's a lot we could say there, but let's just keep going. For she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Verse 3. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shemeth, David's brother. Again, if you do the family tree relationship thing here, you figure out he's not just a friend, this guy Jonadab. He's actually the cousin of Amnon. So they're talking about cousins here. We're keeping it all in one family today, all right? So try to make it easy by keeping it all in one family. And the next line in this verse is very telling. It says this. It says, Jonadab was a very shrewd man. It's just a quick, simple line, but there's a lot of meaning that's built into this, all right? So when it says that he is a shrewd man, you might think he was wise, he was smart, and he probably was. He was probably a very intelligent guy. And if you were here last week, you know that we talked about there's a problem when intelligence sits on the throne of your life as well. Not that we want people to be ignorant. We want people to know what they believe, all of that. But when that is the driving factor of your life, that can be a problem. Well, Jonadab is a guy who lets intelligence drive his life. And this word, shrewd, kind of portrays a guy that is crafty, a guy that schemes, that likes to, connive things. That's the kind of implication that we get here. And if you think about it, this word, shrewd, as it describes him, is actually used to describe another character in Scripture. I don't know if it hit you or not, but If you go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, you remember the story of Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve are characters right at the very beginning. And then in chapter 3, it tells us about the snake, the serpent that is introduced to them. Do you remember how he is described in Genesis? It's not exactly the same Hebrew word, but it's the same connotation here. And so basically, if you go back to Genesis chapter 3 and read, it will tell you that the serpent was a crafty being. He was the most shrewd of all of the creatures that God had put on the earth, right? And so it describes him in the same way. So when it says that Jonadab was a shrewd man, what it's saying is he is probably smart, but he is using the intelligence of the world, just like Satan would be the intelligence of the world, versus the intelligence of God. He is not following the path of God. Okay, so that's kind of an important part, because really what's happening is Jonadab is to Amnon what media is to us. He is the wisdom of the world. He is what the world is telling you is good, right? That is what he is to his cousin Amnon. So listen to how he interacts with him. In verse 4 it says, he, Jonadab, asked Amnon, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." And so here's the advice that he gives him. Here's the great wisdom that he throws his way. He says this. He says, "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare food in my sight so that I may watch her and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so that I may eat from her hand." If you're anything like me, and if you think through a 21st century American lens in your mind, you may listen to this and think, what in the world is going on here? Why is he asking his sister to come in and prepare food? And, why in the world would this be happening? And the reality is, we don't totally know, but the speculation is that there was some folklore in their culture, there was something in their culture that said that if a virgin serves a sick person, she can transfer some of her vitality to them and they might get better. So that's kind of the folklore that is apparently happening at this time. That's kind of the cultural thought at this moment. And so that's what's done. They make this request that the sister Tamar would come in and serve him food. And David, the dad, just goes along with this, right? It doesn't seem like a big deal to him. So going on in verse 7, it says, David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, and made the bread in his sight and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat it. "Send everyone out of here," Amnon said. So everyone left. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food here into my bedroom so that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. Verse 11, but when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." Again, this is that moment. Yeah, for most of us in here, we just threw up a little bit in our life, right? This is that moment that why in the world would this ever happen, and why would they write it down and record it for us and all of that, right? This is incredibly hard to rationalize. It's incredibly hard to understand. But just pausing for a minute to acknowledge the reality of the situation, it is very clear that Amnon has lust sitting on the throne of his heart, right? There's really no debating that. It is clear that lust is sitting in the driver's seat, and it's taking him places that he probably never dreamed he would go in life. Guys, it's really easy to minimize things because everything in society minimizes this to us. And so it's really easy for us to sit here and judge Amnon and to minimize our own issue with this. But the reality is this is a powerful thing. This is something that will take you places you never wanted to go. There is no one alive, I guarantee you there's no one alive who as a child said, I want to be known as a rapist. I want to be known as somebody who hurts other people. I want to be known as somebody who takes advantage of those. None of us think that way, right? But in this case, Amnon has lust sitting on the throne of his heart and the driver's seat of his life. And here's what happens. When we allow lust to linger, when we allow it to sit on the fringes and be close to us, and when we just kind of casually interact with it, every time this is what happens. Lust looks for an opportunity, and then lust abuses someone else. That is what always happens with lust. It looks for an opportunity, and it abuses someone else. Whenever we let it sit on the fringes, that's where you can be pretty sure that it's going to end up taking you. All right? That's what happens with Amnon here. So let's keep reading. In verse 12, this is a point where Tamar actually, you wouldn't think she had all of her faculties about her in terms of she's in the heat of the moment and she is being put in a situation that she never wanted to be in, but she actually has incredibly reasonable argument that she presents to him right here. She asks him 3 questions essentially that are incredibly important. So listen to this. She says, "Don't, my brother," she said to him, "don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel." That's a phrase that, again, we look at that and we say, well, that's kind of weird. You know, if this is happening in the United States, does somebody say, such a thing should never happen in America? No, we don't think that way, right? But what she's saying to him is deeper than that. What she's saying is Israel is a special nation. Israel is God's people. We are the ones that God brought out of Egypt. We are the ones that God established in this land. We are God's people. And so what she's saying is, what about God? What is God going to think of this? If you carry out these plans, if you go down this path, what is God going to think? Incredibly important question, and I don't think we have to linger here because we kind of know the answer, right? We don't have to dwell on this long to know what God is going to think of this, and that's the beginning of her argument to try to stop this from happening. She says, don't do this wicked thing. Verse 13, she asks the second question. She says, what about me? So not only did she say, what about God? What is God going to think? But she stops the whole thing, and she's looking at the guy who's struggling with lust, and she says, what about me? Guys, it doesn't matter how this plays out. I guarantee you, if you allow lust to sit on the throne of your life, it's going to take you to a place you don't want to go, and there's going to be somebody around you who can ask this question. There's going to be a spouse, there's going to be a fiance, there's going to be somebody you're dating, there's going to be a child that can always look at you and say, what about me? Are you really going to do this to me? Are you really at that point where you're willing to hurt me just so you can have momentary pleasure? An incredibly rational question that she asked, right? And then she kind of explains her question further. She says, where could I get rid of my disgrace? In this culture at this time, if you're a virgin, that's celebrated and you wore special clothing and everything else. And she's saying, now I'm going to be exposed to the community. Who would ever want to be my husband if I am not a virgin? She said, where can I get rid of my disgrace? And then she asked another important question. She says this. She says, and what about you? Have you thought about the consequences of this? Have you thought about where this is going to end up in the long run? This isn't just going to be kept quiet. This isn't going to be something that's just passed over. This is going to be a big deal. Have you thought about the way that this is going to hurt you in the long run? Guys, I heard a pastor say not too long ago something that I think is so true. He said this. He said that lust is not the unforgivable sin, but it always comes with consequences. Lust is not unforgivable by God, but it always comes with consequences. And so Tamar is just presenting this incredibly logical case to Amnon. And she's saying, what about God? What is God going to think? What about me? Are you really going to do this to me? What about you? Do you understand the consequences that this is going to bring to you? But do you know what the problem is? Lust doesn't listen to intelligence. Lust doesn't listen to reason. It never does. And you're going to see in this case, Amnon doesn't listen to her questions. And so intelligence is not the only solution here. It's part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. She asks all the right questions, but listen to the way that he goes in spite of that. She says, and what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than her, he raped her. Verse 15, and Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, get up and get out. This may be one of those points where you say, what just happened? Because I thought he really loved her. I thought he was lusting after her. Here's what happened. It's the same thing that always happens. When lust gets its way, when lust takes action, there is always regret that comes with it. I don't know how to explain this well, but this is what typically always happens. When lust gets its way, when lust takes action, there's that moment of, oh, what did I just do? What just happened? There's that moment of regret that turns into, I hate that that happened. I hate that we went there. I hate that this has been a part of my life. And in some cases, that hate moves from the situation to the person that's involved. And it seems like that's what's happening here with Amnon and Tamar. It says that he hated her, and he hated her with even more hate than he had loved her with previously. And so he tells her, get out of here. Get out of my sight, get out of the room. And just to kind of fill you in on another important historical point here. In Israel, the law of Israel, the law of Moses, the law of God, it stated, if you did this to a virgin, then you were responsible to marry her. Because just like she was saying earlier, the community is going to basically see me as an outcast from now on. And so God was saying, if you do this to a virgin, you are responsible for her. Otherwise, you have ruined the rest of her life. You have killed the rest of her life. And so she is about to say, look, we've messed up, but let's do the right thing now. You can still marry me. You can still take care of me for the rest of my life. But listen to the way that he responds. Again, at the end of verse 15, he said, get up and get out. Verse 16, no, she said to him, sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you've already done to me. But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, get this woman out of here and bolt the door after her. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing a richly ornamented robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornamented robe she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away weeping aloud as she went. This may seem like, man, that's a pretty intense story. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration of where lust takes you. It may feel like that to some degree. You could very easily sit here and say, yeah, at times people struggle with this. At times I struggle with this. But I would never go there. I would never take it to that degree. And I just want to remind you that, guys, it's really easy to rationalize that sitting in a church building. But the power of lust is much deeper than many people realize. It will take you places that you never intended to go. It will take you places that you never wanted to go. This is one of those issues that we can just flatly say lust should never, ever be allowed to sit in the driver's seat of your life. Lust should never be allowed to sit on the throne of your life, because it will always end up hurting you and hurting the people around you. So here's the big question. How do we get free of this? If we know that this is a social issue, if we know that this is a human being issue, if we know that we struggle with this, and society just says it's okay and just, no big deal, it's funny or whatever. If we know that, how do we get to a healthy place where we do not allow lust to be the driver in our lives? Here's the good news. Jesus said that you can be free. And those are the words that he uses. He says it's kind of like being chained up. It's like being bound to something. A lot of times for people, this is an addiction. This is a problem that is bigger than they know how to deal with the problem. And so Jesus says it's kind of like you're bound in chains, but you can be free. There's a point in John, the book of John, where Jesus says something that you've heard before. But he says this. He says, you will know the truth. He's talking to people that believe in him. He says, you will know the truth. And by the way, when he says truth, he's talking about himself. He says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. His statement is, as you come to me, I will set you free. Guys, the whole purpose of the cross, the reason that Jesus died, was, first of all, so that we could have a relationship with the Father, but second of all, so that we could be set free of those chains of sin that had bound us before. When Jesus died on the cross, he killed the power of sin. And the only way sin gets power back is when we give it back. The good news is Jesus can set you free. And later on in Scripture, it tells us a little more detail of how this works. So in Galatians chapter 5, a guy named Paul is writing a letter to believers in Galatia. And as he writes to them, he talks about this kind of stuff. Listen to what he says in Galatians 5, chapter 5, verse 1. He says this. He says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. In other words, he says exactly what we just said. Jesus didn't just die so we can have a relationship with God, as important as that is. He also died to set us free from the bondage of sin. And then the next statement is really important. It says this, stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. I have people ask me all the time, can you really be a believer? Can you really be a Christian if you still struggle with sin? Did you hear the answer that Paul just gave? He's talking to believers, and he says, don't let yourself become slaves again. You've been a slave before. You know what that is like. Don't do it again. So he says, yes, as believers, you can allow yourself to be in bondage, in slavery to lust. It can happen. But Christ came to set you free, he says. And so he goes down, and at kind of the middle of this chapter, in verse 16, he gives us the answer as to how this works. He says this, he says, so I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. That is the answer. That's where you find freedom. He says, live by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh. He says the answer to this whole problem is not a better rationale. It's not a better argument. It's not better questions. Tamar asked all of the right questions in that situation, and Amnon still went the wrong way, right? It's not about better questions. It's about being in better company. It's not about coming up with a better argument. It's about being with God. He says, live by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh. You say, well, what does that mean? How does that work? You know what that means? That means as temptation starts to roll in, you don't just say, oh, I'm going to fight this, I'm going to fight this. You say, I need to get to God. And so maybe when temptation rolls in for you, maybe it's just starting to pray and saying, God, I'm struggling. I need you. I need your presence. I need you to help me. Maybe for you, when temptation starts to roll in, it's sitting down and actually opening the Bible and saying, speak to me, Father, because I'm being attacked at the moment and I need your help. Maybe for you, it's just going to a friend and talking about God. It doesn't even have to be about the lust thing. It can be just, hey, I need to talk to somebody about God to change my mindset at the moment. I need to talk to, hey, I've been reading these things. What do you think about what the Bible says on these things about God? It's just going to a friend and saying, I need somebody to talk to about God's stuff for a minute. He says, here's the thing. Stop just fighting against the sin and start running to God. Run to God to reclaim your freedom. That's the big idea. That's what God tells us. If you want to be free from lust, being in the driver's seat of your life, you have to run to God to reclaim your freedom. Amnon did everything except this. He heard all the rational arguments. He went through all the process, and he allowed lust to remain in the driver's seat because he never ran to God. Guys, we don't have to read the rest of the story to just figure out. This messed up the rest of his life. Amnon would not become king later on. And this would cause so many problems later on. It messed up the rest of his life. When lust is in the driver's seat, it will drive you in the ditch every time. God says, here's the way to fight. Yeah, you should put distance. Yeah, you should use filters. Yeah, you should do that kind of stuff as you need to do it. But that's not the final solution. The final solution is that you don't worry about asking better questions. You worry about being a better company. You go spend time with the Father. Guys, I don't know if any of you need prayer over this or other things, but if you are at a point where you're saying, you know what, maybe this is the issue that you needed prayer over. Maybe there's something else that you're really struggling with being on the throne of your life right now. If you're at that point, that's what these little cards are for. They're in the seat backs in front of you. I would just encourage you to grab one of these. Use it to say, I need help. I need somebody to be praying with me. I need somebody fighting this battle with me. We don't take these and put them on the screen. We don't announce them. We don't tell anybody about this. This is between you and the staff who pray for you, who join you in fighting this battle with you. And so if you're at that place, I would really encourage you to use this little card. Even if that means you grab it and you stick it in your pocket and you take it out and mail it to us or whatever. So that you don't, people won't see you drop it in the generosity box. Whatever you need to do, I would encourage you to use this. But you may also be at a point where you say, that sounds good, that sounds right, I understand what you're saying, but I don't really know how to do that because I've never had a relationship with God. If you're at that point, please come talk to me. That's the greatest joy in life, is to start a relationship with God. And I would love nothing more than to talk to you about how that works today. So you may be at that point where you're saying, I want this help. I want to get past this, so I know I need a relationship with God. Please come talk to me before you leave today. Or again, fill out one of these cards and just indicate on there that you want to talk to me, and I'll reach out to you. Okay? But if you do fill those out, you can drop them in the generosity box on your way out. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. It's not about asking better questions. It's about being a better company. Let's start doing that today. Father, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for the fact that you don't gloss over the real issues of life. God, we know that this is not something that we like to talk about, but it's something that is so important for us. And so we thank you that you're a God who doesn't walk away from us, even when we get it wrong, even when we do the wrong things. You're a God who sits and waits on us to come back. And Father, I pray that you would give us the heart to do that. I pray that you will come running to us and that we come running to you. We need you. We love you so much, and we pray these things in the power of your name, Jesus. Amen.